Hello everyone, welcome to another video on this channel. In this video I will show you a very interesting game that I played recently at the chess tournament league actually. And I think it's very interesting, and it will allow you to maybe consider a lot of tactical opportunities that I had in this game for yourself. So I highly recommend you to just take your chessboard and analyze this yourself, because I think you will find it very interesting. So without further ado, let's go and see this game. I played the white pieces and I started with d4, which is the move that I usually play. And my opponent answered with knight f6, and I played bishop f4, which is known as a London system. I already explained it on this channel in my first video. You can see that afterwards. The main idea is to simply play this pawn to e3 and make sure that this bishop is outside of the pawn chain. It's not trapped in behind his own pawns. Which is very useful, very solid, and easy to play, which I proved in this game as well. My opponent played pawn to e6, which is quite a good move. It prepares to move this bishop away, maybe to b4 or to e7, just get ready to castle. Also, maybe playing d5 is a possibility. However, I didn't really bother myself with that. I played e3. My opponent played c5 and attacked my center, and it's a move that you always have to watch out for in the London system, because your opponent might be threatening queen to b6 in some lines, putting pressure on the undefended b2 pawn, and that's why I played c3, so that if my opponent played queen to b6, I would be able to defend with queen to b3. And I'm really okay with him taking the pawn on b3, because I would open up my rook and get very active. So in fact, this would be quite good for me. But my opponent didn't play that. He played a more casual move, which is d5, simply developing and taking position in the center. I played knight to d2, which is a useful move. Now sometimes I can bring my rook to b1 or c1. Also, the knight controls the e4 square, so that the black knight is not able to jump in there without being afraid of being captured. Knight to c6 just developing, knight f3 just developing, bishop d6. Now attacking my bishop, and some of the viewers may think that taking the bishop is good. But to my mind, it's not as good as what I played in the game, because you just helped black to develop his queen, and your advantage of a good bishop on this diagonal is just lost. And that is why I moved my bishop to g3 in order to keep the bishop, and I'm very okay with him taking, because I would recapture with my h-pawn, again opening up this rook, and well, please castle, because this attack is just going to crush you. Of course, he saw that and he didn't take my bishop on g3, he castled instead, which is a normal move. And I played bishop to d3, and here my opponent gave away his strategy. He played rook to e8, and he's saying, okay, I'm going to push pawn to e4 and really attack your pawn, maybe also threaten some fork on both d3 and f3. So it's pretty dangerous. So generally, I have to say, it's the only way to play this position is to stop that and play knight e5. Now it's impossible to push the pawn. Of course, it's somewhat dubious maybe for some of you, because okay, you can take, and then after I take back I have doubled pawns, but in fact it would give me a good attacking prospects, because this knight is forced away, say, to d7, and then I have possibilities of bringing my queen over to h5 or to g4, which was not possible before due to the knight being on f6. So it's not anything bad. And my opponent realized that and played queen to c7, simply exerting more pressure on this knight. And I just decided to defend it forever and ever and play the move pawn to f4, which I think is very good. It establishes it just establishes control over this e5 square, so that it's really impossible for black to eliminate my troops from there. For example, if he just takes, I take back with a pawn, and again I have a very fantastic position with this pawn. So he didn't do that, and after f4 just developed, played bishop to d7, and he seemed pretty confident in this position, but in fact I have a very strong move, which is bishop to h4. Now, my opponent didn't really realize how powerful that move is, because okay, it threatens to take the knight and somewhat damage the structure, but it's not only about damaging the structure, it's mostly about eliminating the defender of these two squares, to which my queen would be very happy to come to. So, well, he should have stopped that, but he played a different move. He played c takes d4. Now, after I reviewed this game at home, I found out that e takes d4 was the best move, because really it just allows me to go for the same attack that I went for in the game, but without any losses that, well, you will see that later. I actually played bishop takes on f6, which I consider to be a very good move as well, and the engine agrees with me. Now, the only move for my opponent which would allow him to stay in the game is simply g takes f6. But then, again, it's not simple. I have a move like queen to g4 check, after which he would go king f8. Of course, he cannot go king h8 due to the mate. So my opponent has to go to f8 in this case. And then I can just take on d7, and after he takes back with a queen, I can either take on h7, which is good, or I can just take on d4 and really have a nice position, and maybe still threatening this pawn, so maybe I would even be up a pawn in that position. And my opponent didn't want to be down a pawn. He also could have considered, cannot really play, but he could have considered that he can take the knight. But it really is not good, because after f takes e5, well, you cannot take this bishop anymore, because after you take it, well, this loses. After queen g4, king h8, and e takes f6, threatening mate, threatening mate. And if rook to g8, then simply queen to h5. And again, so many threats. This is just losing position. The computer is shows something around 8 plus 8. I mean, that is why he took on e3, which at first appears to be very good, because it attacks my piece with a tempo. So it may seem that I have to move this knight, say, to f3, and then my queen cannot come into the game. But I didn't do that, of course. I went for the attack and played a fantastic move with, well, I think it's fantastic and the engine agrees with me, queen to h5, and sacrificing a piece on d2, which he gladly took. But first, I would like to point out some other very interesting variations that I considered before playing queen to h5. One of the moves is bishop captures on h7. It seems very dangerous because he cannot take the bishop, obviously, because of queen h5 check, king g8 check, here, and checkmate. Game over. So, of course, taking the bishop is impossible. Of course, king h8, again, queen h5, and then these covered attacks are just finishing him very quickly. But this doesn't really work, because he can move king f8 and he stands quite solidly. Although still, I probably have some advantage after queen h5, but it's not so simple. Another move that I considered is queen to g4, after which, okay, he can take on d2, and I would move here, and he can play bishop to f8, which actually seems to be defending quite well, but I still have this bishop h7 idea. But now, the problem is that I don't have this checkmate anymore, because this square is defended. So you see, it's not so easy. Although computer still shows it's good for white, but it's not such an easy win as it might appear. That is why I played queen to h5, and my opponent took the knight on d2. And I didn't take the pawn back. It's important not to do that, although, well, maybe it is possible, but the better move is king to d1. Now, why is that so? Well, after all of these tactics that are possible in this position, my opponent could have taken the pawn on f4, maybe with a bishop if I moved this knight, and he would do that with check. And I really don't want to do that. So I just moved king to d1. Now, there are two threats. One is queen takes h7, this is supported by the bishop, and queen takes f7, this is supported by the knight. The only way to stop both threats is to play g6, and that's exactly what my opponent played. But now came the real nice move. Knight takes g6, and my opponent, well, was shocked by this move. The only move to not get checkmated very soon is f takes g6. Of course, it is not possible to take the knight with the other pawn due to checkmate. And of course, if he tried anything, literally anything else, any other move than f takes g6, then it's mate in 3, believe it or not. Any other move. Let's say he, I don't know, let's say he wants to win a pawn like this. Then simply knight takes f4, and okay, let's say queen recaptures, but then just queen takes h7 check, king f8, and queen to g7 checkmate. Game over. Any other move, I guess, let's say after h6, then we can just go knight to e7 check, and no matter what he takes back with, let's say with a rook, queen takes h7, king f8, queen h8, checkmate, game over. So really, the only move is to take the knight on g6, and now comes another nice move, bishop captures on g6. Of course, it's not possible to take back because of check and checkmate, so that's another nice tactic. So now there is a threat on h7, and there are two ways to stop that, but in real world only one works. Of course, rook to f7, trying to defend the pawn like this, just loses to bishop takes rook, and now this is really impossible to defend. Really, it's mate in 3 or 2. That is why my opponent played bishop to c8. Now the queen is protecting the pawn, but unfortunately there is no more protection of this rook on e8, and I just took it. Okay, and here my opponent is completely doomed. He has really no chance of surviving this position, but he tried some more moves. Bishop takes on f4. Now it is somewhat dangerous because if I misplay that, he has this dangerous pawn on d2, which is protected, so I cannot take it. But I find a very nice winning sequence with a rook to f1. Rook to f1 simply bringing another attacker into the game with, well, sort of a tempo actually, because with an attack on the bishop. And he defended it with e5, but still it wasn't quite enough. I played g3, simply forcing this bishop to move away from this f5, allowing me to bring my rook over to the attack. My opponent played bishop to e3, the only square in which it doesn't get captured. But now I played, well, maybe it's not the best move in the position, but I guess it's one of the best moves. Bishop to g5, simply making a way for my rook to come to f7 with an attack on the queen, with an attack on h7, and this bishop actually threatens to take this bishop. So that's a lot of tactics. My opponent took my bishop on g5, allowed rook to f7 to come with an attack on the queen and on the pawn. He doesn't really have a defense, so he deflected my queen with bishop to g4. Now there is a check to my king and an attack on the queen, so I'm forced to take the bishop. And now, well, I guess the best move is just queen takes f7, giving away the queen, but that's obviously losing. He played the different move, queen to d8, defending his bishop, but I simply played queen to h5, threatening mate, and there's no good defense to that. My opponent played h6 in order not to get checkmated on h7, but I simply played queen to g6, check. He played king to h8, and now there are many ways that I can give mate. Actually, I see 4 of them. I chose rook to h7, and that's game over. So really, I think it was one of my best games this year. I would like to get to know your thoughts about this game. What do you think? Did you enjoy it? What do you think about this attack? Did you check some variations yourself? Maybe you found something interesting. You can share that with me in the comment section below. But I would just like to go back to this critical moment of the game where he just didn't pay attention to this attack on f6. I think it was crucial because after I took with a bishop, it was really essential for him just to take with the g-pawn. And, well, although he's still allowing moves like bishop takes h7 or queen g4, he would be surviving this with slightly worse position. But it was very difficult to see that after he takes here queen h5. I think the crucial mistake of his was that he did not see knight takes g6, because it's really a crushing move that completely destroys his position. And, well, as further attacks proved. So I think that's all for this game. As I said earlier, I hope you enjoy it and maybe got something out of it. Okay, take care. Bye.